Good morning. I'm Bonnie Gardner. I'm co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our forums are free and open to the public and usually are on Sundays at noon. We welcome your attendance. For more information about our forums, please go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. Today, I'm honored and excited to be introducing Brigid Shea, who will be speaking on drought in Central Texas. As our climate and weather continue to change, we need good leadership to prepare our community for the dual impact of drought and wildfires. Brigid Shea is really an expert on disaster prevention practices and preparedness. She studied these things at a national level. She's an expert communicator and advocate of environmental policies over many years. She's a former award-winning journalist, environmental organizer, and elected official. She's specialized in developing and implementing effective environmental policies since 1988. Currently, she is principal of two environmental consulting firms, Carbon Shrinks and Brigid Shea and Associates. She also advises heavy industry, corporations, governments, and nonprofits. She's a certified carbon reduction manager and frequent public speaker and trainer. And let's give Brigid Shea a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really delighted to be here. I had to say, when I woke up this morning, I thought, what are the odds that on the day that I come to speak to you about historic drought, it rained? So I figured, how many of you washed your cars yesterday? That had to be it, right? Okay, that was it. But in all seriousness, we are in the grips of what I call global climate disruption. That's how I describe climate change. And whether Governor Perry believes in it or not, the overwhelming scientific data and evidence tells us that it's happening. I believe it's the defining issue of our time. Although I have to say the governor's war on women and Wendy Davis may be a close second. The effects of this change will dominate the lives of our children and grandchildren and alter the planet in ways we cannot now imagine. And the really difficult thing about this issue is that it scares the tar out of people, and they don't want to think about it or talk about it, which is part of my explanation for why our leaders haven't done more about it. According to Dr. James Hansen, the former head of the Goddard Space Institute at NASA and the leading scientist on this issue, we have used up all the slack in our schedule. He first told the world about it in 1988 when he briefed Congress on a phenomenon that they'd been studying and tracking at NASA and trying to understand. They finally determined that a blanket of pollution was accumulating around the planet from the burning of fossil fuels. It was trapping the sun's heat and would eventually heat the planet to a point that life was unsustainable. This testimony changed my life. I was working as a national press secretary in Washington, D.C., and I literally read the story in the front page of the New York Times, put the paper down, and picked up the phone and called friends. And I said, we all have to drop what we're doing right now and work on this issue, or we can measure our coffins and get in. I dropped what I was doing. And some people don't quite understand this, but I came to Texas. I said, why did you come to Texas to work on this issue? Part of it was because I was helping to start a statewide chapter of Texas Clean Water Action. And many of you have probably been canvassed by representatives of Clean Water Action. Anybody, does that sound familiar? Anyone come to your door on those issues? Yeah. And I also came to Texas to help Jim Hightower, who at that time was thinking of running against Phil Gramm for the U.S. Senate. So I say global warming, and Jim Hightower got me to Texas. So 25 years later, some things are clear to me. The debate about climate change may well continue for years. And I tell people, that's fine. You can continue to have that debate, but I'm going to focus my efforts on the things that I see that are happening on the ground and affecting our communities. I believe our leaders must prepare our communities to deal with the terrible effects of the severe weather changes that are happening right now and are real. We must have a bold vision that galvanizes our community, and I have some ideas in that regard. We in Central Texas have to lead the way. We can't wait for our state to take action. We're in an epic water crisis, and what does the governor do? He calls a second special session to continue a war on women. I'm sorry, that's a profound failure of leadership in my book. And at the federal level, Congress can't even get agreement to pass a budget. Given our local leadership on the environment and the track record we have here, I believe we have all the talent and the resources to really lead the way for the nation. So, on to our question of the drought. How bad is it? I'm not going to do a Jay Leno on this. I believe we're in a water crisis and that our drinking water supply is severely threatened. Our reservoirs, which are created by the Colorado River, are the Highland Lakes, namely Lake Travis and Lake Buchanan. As of this morning, I double-checked. The lakes are at 37% full. Until the recent rains, we were on track to have less water than in 2011, which was this region's worst drought on record. If you look at the drought forecast for the western watersheds, and this is from the U.S. Seasonal Drought Outlook, goes through September. The drought forecast for the western watersheds of the Colorado River, it's even drier out there. I don't know how many of you have been to Lake Travis recently, but it's very sobering. If you haven't visited, you should, just to see visually where we stand. The fact that makes this drought worse than the drought of the 1950s is the extreme heat. According to the U.S. Global Change Research Program, and that's an amalgam of all of the scientific data, all the different agencies that are gathering and collecting and monitoring data, a few years back. So they may have updated this more recently, but 2 years ago, their projections were that the temperatures for this region will be similar to the Sonoran Desert in Arizona by about 2080. And that was a conservative estimate. The real impacts of the heat can be seen in the evaporation on our lakes. And I believe this was something that was not fully factored into the water supply planning for our region. According to the LCRA, in 2011, the Highland Lakes lost more water to evaporation than the entire city of Austin used in a year. I'm going to repeat that because when I tell people this, it's so startling, it's really hard for people to fully grasp. In 2011, we lost more water in our lakes to evaporation than the entire city of Austin used in that year. It's as if we doubled the population of the region in 1 year. And how many new people are moving here each month? 150. Right. So we are growing at an astonishing rate, but our water supply is not. And I have to say, for the record, Water Treatment Plant 4 will not guarantee water. It can't manufacture water. Despite claims that it would guarantee a reliable supply of water, it can only treat the water that's in the lake, that's available. The other disturbing reality is that our planning agencies are failing us. The governor has literally prohibited state agencies from spending any money on anything related to climate change. And the LCRA is not taking it into account in its long-range water plans. I've talked directly with staff at LCRA, and they're even being criticized internally for referencing the term climate change from a report in the 1980s. Staff was literally reprimanded because they referenced that term when referring to a report from the 1980s. So they are not taking the new data and the evolving science and the information into account in their long-range planning. And they are the planning body for our water supply for this region. They govern the entire stretch of the Colorado River, from its source to the coast. And they're not taking this into account when they do their long-range plan. Ironically, I don't know if you remember this in the news, but June 3rd, the TCEQ, which is the state environmental agency, actually publicly criticized LCRA for not adequately taking the drought into account. Now, part of that was driven by a very well-organized protest by people who live around the lakes, residents, businesses, government leaders, and they had to conduct a sustained campaign with the LCRA to prevent them from releasing water downstream to the rice farmers this season. Had they done that, I can't imagine what a world of hurt we'd be in. So they had to conduct an extensive campaign with the LCRA, and they then went and lobbied at the state level and played a role in having TCEQ criticize LCRA's planning process and hold up the adoption of their long-range water plan, because they think they're not adequately preparing for the impact of this drought and making sufficient plans for our long-term water needs. And this is from the state agency that's prevented by the governor from spending any money on anything related to climate change. So we have to recognize that our state and regional bodies that are charged with planning and preparing can't do the job. Their hands are literally tied behind their backs. So the bottom line is we need our leaders to make this a priority, to lead the way on vigorous water conservation, water reuse, and making it easier for people to reuse their water on site in their homes. Can I just see a show of hands of how many people who have rain tanks in their homes? Yeah, I mean, Austin is leading the way on this. At the county level, it's harder to do on-site water reuse. The state rules have made it more difficult, and the county is bound by the state rules. We need to start treating water as a finite resource. We've always assumed that it would rain, and I'm a big proponent of prayer, but I'm sorry, praying for rain is not a plan. We need to plan and we need to prepare for water as a finite resource in the future. Aside from the lakes, the other visible sign of the drought and heat is the loss of the tree canopy. How many of you have either lost trees around your own home or seen them go down in your neighborhood in the last couple of years? Look around this room. Keep your hands up. Everyone keep your hands up who's seen it. Just look around this room. So this is a relatively small sampling. We are losing our urban tree canopy at an alarming rate. We don't have the exact up-to-date numbers, but we do know from 2011 and 2012, according to the A&M Forest Service, we lost over 300 million rural trees. 300 million trees in the last 2 years in rural areas. We don't yet know the count for 2013, but it's going to be high because the trees that were stressed in 2011 and 2012 will be dying in 2013 and onward. And according to similar counts, we lost over 5 million trees in urban areas. In Travis County, we pride ourselves on our open space, our acres and acres of beautiful preserves and parks and green belts. And the reality is, as those trees die, they become tinder and fuel for urban wildfires. Because we have so much green space and preserved land within our city and county, we're considered a higher urban wildfire threat, a much higher threat than Bastrop. And that's the picture on the right. How many of you had any contact with Bastrop, had friends who lost buildings, homes, land? Again, let's see, hands. Bastrop is a much lower urban wildfire threat than Austin is. In many, many rankings, Austin shows up as a much higher urban wildfire threat, one of the highest in the nation. While we have great and heroic firefighters in our community, the service in the county in particular is fragmented among 13 different emergency service districts. This is something that I've learned fairly recently. They are separate districts. They are scattered all across the county. The revenue that they have only comes from the tax base within their jurisdiction. And their jurisdictions are shrinking as the city annexes areas. So these 13 different emergency service districts scattered around the county, they have different tax bases, different governing boards, and different amounts of equipment and personnel. And when you talk with them, as I have, they will tell you they need more resources and they need our community to be more prepared. I had a conversation recently with the public safety personnel about the Steiner Ranch fire. Do any of you know people who were affected by the Steiner Ranch fire? I asked if they were prepared, and they said no. And they said even if we had been able to get people out of Steiner Ranch quickly, one main road in, one main road out, they said even if we'd been able to get people out of there quickly, more quickly, there was nowhere for them to go on 620. 620 was backed up. And they said we would have had to have people at 620 and 183 moving traffic quickly. We would have had to have people at 620 and 2222, at 2222 and 360, at all the major roadway intersections, moving traffic to free up space on 620 so that people could get out of Steiner Ranch. So there are many, many levels at which we need to be more prepared, and our public safety personnel will tell you they want the resources and they want the community engaged on this issue. So you remember I said at the beginning that talking about these things scares the tar out of people. And I haven't even told you some of the really scary stories. I'll tell you one real briefly. I was at a gathering in Westlake Hills recently. Beautiful home, nestled up in the trees, looking out over Lake Austin, up a long, windy, narrow road. And I asked the host, I said, I don't mean to be depressing, but do you have an emergency evacuation plan if a wildfire starts? And he said, yeah, run like hell. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, and I'm serious. My partner is the volunteer fire chief. And that's the plan. And he said, no one will be able to go back to get anything. You really have to run like heck. And how many of you know people in Westlake who are concerned about this? You had conversations with folks who live out there? I talked with one fellow who's very smart, has been concerned about this for a very long time. He had a pool built in his backyard a few years ago. And he said that the workers thought he was crazy when he asked them to run a line from his pool up to the top of his roof. And then he installed a very large sprinkler up there. And part of his plan is if a fire breaks out in Westlake, he's going to drain his pool through that sprinkler and water down as much of his house, his roof, the surrounding trees as possible. And I said, well, what happens if the electric lines burn up and there's no power? And he said, I thought of that. I have an emergency generator under my pool. He said, but the only part I haven't figured out is how will I be able to convince my wife when she's trying to get the kids and the dogs and our, very few belongings that we know we need to take into the car, how will I convince her to go back up under the pool and turn on the emergency generator? But interestingly, and he also switched out the siding on his home to a fire-resistant siding. And interestingly, he got a reduction in his homeowner's insurance. So for me, that's part of this puzzle as well. To me, the next real opportunity and challenge for us is leadership. I believe we can lead our way out of this problem. One of the really great things about people in Texas is that we like to think big, and we love to be number one. A city council member in the 1990s did just that when he declared that Austin would be the live music capital of the world. Do any of you remember that? That was Max Knopfziger. And people laughed and made fun of him. But that's actually one of our claims to fame today. It's a brand for Austin. It's a big part of why so many people come here. And we believe that we're the live music capital of the world. We declared it, and we work to make it so. The same thing happened when Brewster McCracken declared that we would be the world leader on the smart electric grid. And he created it with the Pecan Street Project. Are any of you participants in that? It's a national class program that's leading the way to literally create smart communications between the electric grid and people's homes and buildings. So that if there's a big drain on the electric grid and there's a threat of blackouts or rolling brownouts, our grid in Austin can talk through these smart meters at people's homes and literally cut off the air conditioning or turn it down, roll it back, cut off other unnecessary electrical use, and free up more capacity on the grid. You can literally control your thermostat over your phone remotely. You can decide if you're going to turn your dishwasher or your washing machine on remotely. And that was because one person had a vision and gathered people around it and then stuck with it. The same was true when Pike Powers and others, but Pike took a lot of leadership on this, said we're not going to let the Japanese take the lead on the manufacture of semiconductor chips. We can do it in this country. And they created Semitech. Any of you remember Semitech? It was a leader in the world on creating smarter, better, cheaper, safer semiconductor chips. And we, with the help of the environmental community here, led the way on changing the manufacture of chips to eliminate or reduce the use of ozone-depleting chemicals and to reduce worker exposure to harmful chemicals. So we know we can do this. And my challenge to you and our community is that we dedicate ourselves to creating the best community prevention and preparedness program in the nation. I will help go after federal funds to do this. FEMA knows they can't keep coming in after each disaster with a big mop. They don't even have enough mops. So they're looking for community model programs anywhere in the country. We can galvanize people in this community around this vision. We have all the talent, resources, and creativity right here to create the best program in the country. We have great programs scattered around the county. We have great programs in the city of Austin, but they're not coordinated. We have tremendous creative talent in this community. The whole South by Southwest infrastructure brings world-class leaders into our communities each year. They've now started South by Southwest Eco and are bringing environmental leaders into this community each year and drawing from the environmental leaders who are already here. Someone said to me, do you know which city in the country has the highest survival rate for heart attacks? This might not seem related, but it is. Anybody know which city that is? Any guesses? Which city has the highest survival rate for heart attacks? You said which? You got it. It's Seattle. And do you know why? Well, that might be part of it. But the bigger part of it is they created a program to make sure that everyone knows what to do. As many people as possible have learned CPR, and if someone has a heart attack anywhere in a public place, there is bound to be someone there who knows what to do. And they literally have the highest survival rate in the country because they set that as a community goal. So we can do the same thing here. If we stop putting our fingers in our ears and refusing to listen because the news is so scary, and we focus instead on creating the best program in the country where everyone knows what to do. I deliver Meals on Wheels. I've done it for 7 years, and I tell people everyone should do it at least once because it gives you a good glimpse of your possible future, but it's also a great thing to do. I deliver in Northwest Hills. Many, many elderly people live in apartment buildings that are tucked up, backing up to ravines and beautiful green belts, lush with trees, and I guarantee you those apartments don't all have evacuation plans if a fire breaks out. So we need a buddy system where people know to look out for the elderly person near them. We We need people to be able to look at this and think about it and not be frightened about it and avoid it. So I'd love to talk with the people who started Alamo Drafthouse and create a spoof on disaster movies. If we can laugh at it, if we can find humor in it, we can deal with it more easily. I want to engage the high-tech community. We have so many talented people here who are finding ever more creative ways to communicate with people. I never would have imagined that I can do the things with my phone that I'm able to do. And at the Capitol the other night, how many people were there for the filibuster? A large part of how so many of those people learned about it was social media. People in the rotunda and throughout the Capitol texting their friends or posting on Facebook, "Come down here now. Be part of this historic filibuster." So we have the ability to reach people in new and creative ways. And if we turned our talent and our thinking toward literally using the layers of those resources to create the best community prevention and preparedness program in the nation, we can get there. We can galvanize people in our community around this vision because we have the talent and the resources right here. And I'm ready to take the initiative, and I'm looking for volunteers. So thank you so much for having me here to speak, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.
We have a question from Dale Beulah.
Thank you for being here, Brigid.
My
It's more of
pleasure.
a comment. For those of you in the audience who have not yet listened to my spiel, I won't make it. If you need a low-flow aerator or a low-flow shower head to help keep Lake Travis from going dry, please see me. I have them in my bag. They're free from the City of Austin, water utility. Any of you can go down and pick them up at any time for you or your neighbors. But these are left over from our last water conservation event. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Dale. And if you don't know already, these are really simple. You just screw them on the tap, and you still get water. You just doesn't come out at such a high rate of flow, and you don't waste it.
Yes. If under the Wendy Davis administration, the LCRA were to get a new set of operating instructions, and they asked you, well, what should we do as a public agency? We can't make water. What should we do?
Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to a day when we have a Wendy Davis administration in this state. Absolutely. That's just one thing that we can all do. There are so many levels and layers of initiatives that can be taken both at the institutional level, at the government level, at the individual level. The City of Austin is wasting water every day by not fixing broken pipes. A vast amount of water is wasted every single day. There's a great report that Paul Robbins put out called Read It and Leak instead of Read It and Weep. Read It and Leak, and you can find a link to it on the SOS Alliance website. But he chronicles in great detail the programs that are out there that are not being utilized fully. So at the city level, there's many things that can be done, and they do provide the water to the region. They can fix the leaking water lines. They can be much more vigorous about promoting water conservation. A huge amount of our water use in the summer is because we're pouring treated drinking water on our lawns. That was the biggest argument for why we needed water treatment plant 4. It's a $500 million plant that our grandchildren will still be paying for. And I've had conversations with leaders on this. I'm worried there won't be enough water in the lake to treat it for the lifetime of the bond payments on the plant. So we have got to do everything we can to promote much more vigorous water conservation. That is the cheapest, easiest, greatest amount of new water that can be freed up. The state Texas Water Development Board did an extensive study looking at what kinds of initiatives could free up more water and what would they cost. And they released the report a couple of years ago. It's very compelling. It might not seem like it is, but it's good reading. And there was a good story in the Statesman a few years back about it. Literally the greatest amount of water that can be made available at the cheapest cost is conservation, and we're not doing near enough of it. So that's one piece of it. And there needs to be a coordinated, concerted effort on this. The other is water reuse. This, again, is a major source of new water that could actually be potable, but in most cases is used for irrigation and non-potable uses. It's treated sewage. And there's a horrible joke that's been going around for years that says, in the future there's good news and bad news. The good news is we'll all be drinking treated sewage. The bad news is there won't be enough to go around. It's been going around for a long time. That's an old joke. But the fact is we can reuse treated water. And what we're drinking out of the lakes contains a certain amount of sewage that's been treated and dumped back into the Colorado. So water reuse is another huge area where we can free up more water. We will, I believe, have to look very carefully at groundwater, particularly from the Carrizo-Wilcox. That's the largest groundwater aquifer to our east. But aquifers are finite. And I think that's the thing that everyone loses sight of. It's not free water that we can pump and waste as much as we want to. It's like oil, except we can't drink oil. So I think we will have to look at withdrawals from some of our regional aquifers. And then the other big initiative that you're going to see a lot of emphasis on is desalinization. I mean, ultimately, I think that is somewhere we will have to go, but it's very expensive. It involves a tremendous amount of costly infrastructure, and you end up with a lot of extremely salty water left over that you have to figure out where you're going to put. So I think those are some of the initiatives, but none of it, there's no silver bullet and there's no one thing, but it does require coordinated, comprehensive planning and leadership. And that's what the biggest thing we've lacked. Thank you for your question, Philip.
I, for a long time, felt that the only solution, long-term solution, is if we change our development patterns. We're not going to, we're still going to be stuck with a finite supply of water. And that feeling was buttressed by Joe Beal, who used to be a general manager of the LCRA, and I've heard him speak twice in the last 6 months at Acres and at RECA. And he talked about if we continue on the growth path that we're on here in Travis County and Central Texas, we're going to have to build a whole new Highlands Lake chain. I think he said every 3 years. He may have said every 2 years. And that's going to be a challenge. So I guess I'm wondering what you think about the fact that our governor is trying to cut women's health services right now, and he's out trying to recruit companies from other states so that we can continue to grow here, but he's not addressing the problem that you're talking about.
I think it's appallingly bad leadership, which is why, again, I'm saying I hope we have a Wendy Davis administration in the future. But that really is true. I mean, I look at the crises, particularly around water. There will be an election, I think, in November on using the Rainy Day Fund to finance large water infrastructure projects. But the Republicans, many of them were against it, which was bizarre to me. I think they said they did think it was going to be some kind of a pork barrel, plan for engineers to make a lot of money off it. Yes, that will be part of it. But the reality is we do need to change the way we grow. We can't continue to allow acres and acres of St. Augustine, which is some of the thirstiest grass, and allow development patterns that continue that. We are sprawling and it's unsustainable. And that's a much, much larger conversation. But we do have to change the way we grow because it directly affects how much water we use.
So my name is Monica Mueller, and thank you for being here and talking about this very important subject. I do know that the city recently started looking into gray water reuse, and I'm curious what the city is thinking of in terms of composting toilets, additional measures that we can do to save the water that we do have for actually drinking instead of flushing.
Right. Exactly. It is crazy when you think about it that we pump water out of the lakes, we treat it, we pump it all over town, and then we go to the bathroom in it and we flush it and we add more water to it and we flush it miles and miles and miles and use a ton of electricity to do it to a treatment plant to then dump it back into our lakes and rivers. There's got to be a better way to do that. Austin really has been on the forefront on a lot of these things. The citizens have. In some cases, the city has been slower to implement. It's taken a very long time on the gray water rules. And my understanding is they've just recently passed some modifications that will make it easier for people to reuse water on site. There's no reason why people can't use their shower water to water a garden, their sink water to water a garden, or xeriscape plants. And the city has made it easier. At the county level, they're still bound by the state rules, and the state rules are extremely difficult. And they've not indicated a willingness to change on that. There is pressure, and I think there will be more as the cities adopt more loose standards.
Thank you, Bonnie, and the Forum Committee for doing a great job here, and you for being a historic treasure to our community. Thank you for all your good work. So that gets to my question. Break it down for us why we have such a failure in leadership around the issue of water. I mean, we got plenty of people ran for office and got elected, and now they can't seem to be found to have a right mind and common sense about this issue. What is it going to take for us to have the leadership we need to deal with this drought and the water preservation that we need? Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. That is a really important question, and it's one that I've looked at for a long time. I do think part of what has affected our leadership is it really is frightening talking to people about this stuff. And I've had more friends who are smart, concerned, committed people who literally stick their fingers in their ears and go, la, 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 because they don't want to hear it. It's really terrifying. And so that's why I say to people, let's focus on creating solutions, because I really think we're good at that. And if we galvanize people around that, then there's a path out. And there are very real tools and skills and plans that people will need to apply and to use in times of weather disasters that can save lives. So it's a very real need. But honestly, I really do fault the governor. The fact that he has consistently ridiculed the president and anyone who's talked about the science around a changing climate is just, to me, appallingly bad leadership at best. That's one of the nicest things I can say about it. And at the local level, I think that some of our leaders have gotten caught up in the economic arguments. I clearly saw this happen around Water Treatment Plant 4. I know many of the engineers who were involved in lobbying very, very hard for the city to continue building Water Treatment Plant 4. And it was in the depths of the economic collapse, and they were terrified. They were terrified that they would go out of business, that they would have to lay off all their staffs. Many of them did. And they literally had badges at one point that said, Water Treatment Plant 4 is our stimulus program. And so I think the issue got really muddied with people saying, you'll be cutting jobs if you stop this project. It will be bad for our economy if you stop this project. And they didn't ask the larger question, what can we do instead of that would continue jobs and be better for the economy and be better for our environment long term? I really do worry about us being stuck with an asset that we will not be able to fully use nor pay off the bond debt on because of the declining water in Lake Travis. And it's not just Water Treatment Plant 4. The Brushy Creek project is a joint initiative by several of the suburban communities, and I always mess up exactly which towns are in it, but I think it includes some of the towns of Cedar Park, Leander, Jonestown, some of those towns up in there that are also very thirsty and needing water as they grow. And they will also be putting a very large straw in Lake Travis, and have gotten permission for large water withdrawals. So we'll have two big straws sucking more water out of Lake Travis instead of doing the kinds of vigorous water conservation and changing of water use practices that we need to be having leadership on. And I think many people will regret their decision in the future to proceed with that plan because it has locked us in to encouraging more wasteful water practices rather than pursuing vigorous water conservation as we should be. So it's a complicated picture, but I think we've had a profound failure of leadership at the state level. The governor appoints all the members of the board of LCRA, and I can tell you his point of view is actively in practice at LCRA. So he's had a very heavy hand over our regional water planning body, which should have been providing more leadership, but their hands were tied with the governor's point of view being in force at the Water Planning Agency. It's shocking to me that they have not been taking into account the new scientific data that's been emerging for years now on how the climate is changing, particularly rainfall and heat patterns are changing. It has a huge impact on our water supply.
My name is Frances Green, and this is a target-rich environment. There are so many questions I want to ask, but you mentioned desalination, which made me think of a talk I heard just a few months ago by Pliny Fisk from the Center for Maximum Building.
He's a great resource if you don't know of him.
He developed the Green Building Program nationwide. If you hear a LEED Platinum building, that was his initiative. He was talking about solar and wind-powered desalination on the Gulf Coast and pointing out a real win-win in that they've identified that the saline brine that is the residue is in fact readily converted into a complete substitute for concrete, so that you can not only be getting fresh water with using carbon neutral energy, but then you can avoid the intense carbon use that goes into the production of Portland cement. And I suspect there are a lot of economic forces that don't want to do that, but I hope that you have maybe an update or further information about it.
Well, I mean, it gets back to these competing economic forces, and you're right to identify them. Pliny is the head of the Center for Maximum Building Potential Systems, kind of a mouthful. But they're right outside of town on 969, and they've got an operating, is it 969? In 71. They've got an operating laboratory, and it's a remarkable thing to go see. You can go on their website and find out about their open houses, and they have a series of talks that take place there with real thought leaders in this field. And he's right. The combination, particularly in the coastal areas where you've got high wind and you've got a lot of sunshine, there are many, many opportunities to do that. But in the same way that solar and wind and other renewable energy initiatives have been thwarted, you have a huge vested interest in the form of the fossil fuel companies and lobby. And they've invested vast amounts of money in really financing bad science related to climate change, to sow seeds of doubt, to fund coal initiatives. The whole notion about clean coal is heavily funded by the fossil fuel industry. The attacks on solar and on wind energy, again, it's driven by the people who are making money on the continued sale of fossil fuel energy. The electric grid system. I mean, you have many situations where companies have very high debt. You've got a lot of for-profit companies that are in the energy field, and they have very high debt on their coal plants or their natural gas plants or their nuclear plants. And so energy that's relatively inexpensive, which solar and wind is a threat to their revenue to pay off their debts on their expensive energy sources. So this stuff's all interconnected, and it's complicated. And I know that Plenty's been doing interesting research related to cement manufacture, but I hadn't heard that the highly, highly salty brine water left over from the desal process could be used for that. That's an interesting one. Yeah. So there are many resources out there that can lead us down a new path. It really, to me, comes back to, do the people have the will to demand it of our leaders, that we follow this course of action?
Hi, Brigid. Thank you for coming and sharing your
pleasure.
insights with us. My name is Dan O'Shea. I was hoping you might comment on another variable in the mix, which you've come real close to dealing. We have a very aggressive push throughout the state to support the oil and gas industry in the extraction from the shale, the fracking. Do you have an assessment or some thoughts you'd like to share about the effects of this practice and the injection fuels on our aquifers and groundwater?
Yeah, there's a huge debate that, as you can imagine, is also heavily funded by the fossil fuel industry. Actually, Dale sent me a link to a story, I think in the New York Times, about a town in West Texas where a lot of fracking activity was taking place. Do you remember the name of the town? I've forgotten it. Yeah. Yeah. But this town, literally, its wells have dried up. And the companies that are engaged in the fracking activities all around the town that are using a lot of groundwater for fracking, I think are denying that their activities have anything to do with the wells drying up. And it just defies logic that they could get away with even making those claims. I mean, but you saw even at the University of Texas, through a respected institute, a professor came out with a study that said fracking had absolutely no impact on groundwater, wasn't contaminating groundwater, wasn't depleting groundwater. And then it later came out that he was on the board of a fossil fuel company and his research was being funded by them. It completely discredited him. I think they even shut down the institute. So this is going to be a continuing struggle, but I think the evidence will become overwhelming soon enough that it's a very dangerous practice. And then you'll have a very interesting titanic clash. Energy or water? And at the end of the day, we can't drink oil. I think water will win out, but it's going to affect a lot of communities, I think, before we see changes, unfortunately.
We have another question from Dale Beulah.
You mentioned energy, but we haven't really made the connection between energy production and water. Mm-hmm. We know that wind and solar use no water. Coal uses lots of water. Natural gas uses lots, and the biggest user of water in generating electricity is nuclear power, which I didn't know till very recently. Yep. Yet the idea of building another nuclear plant, no one even considers that. My question has to do with this mix. When will we have what I'm told is available, cooling of power plants using air or wind rather than using only water to cool our power plants? I'm told that there are power plants that do not use much or very little water, but yet none of that I've heard here in Texas, which is, to me would be a no-brainer. Yeah. If we're going to build another gas plant, we should have it cooled using air or something else. Although the air's so damn hot, I don't know how it would cool. I know
how it would cool down the plants. I honestly don't know a whole lot about that. But I do know the much higher efficiency turbine natural gas plants are highly efficient. And I don't know the answer to that question about how much water they use or how much less they would use with a highly efficient turbine plant. But I do know when the application went in for the White Stallion plant, it required an enormous amount of water, and that was one of the things that defeated it. The communities around it looked at how much water they would lose and looked at how little water they had and said, we can't afford this. We cannot afford to lose our water supply to this plant. And I think it's dead, or at least it hasn't gotten the water that it needs.
Would you stand and say your name and speak into the microphone, please?
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Henson. I know that here in Texas we have a patchwork of laws that relate to water, aquifer districts, all kinds of things like that. It makes it difficult for us to coordinate and do anything in a fashion that seems sensible to a reasonable voter. I had the good fortune to listen to the woman who runs the Las Vegas Water District, where the big Colorado River has similar water shortage issues, and they have interstate agreements. They have PACs, compacts, in fact, that govern that water usage. They do a lot more than we do about reusing water also. I'm wondering if their argument that, in fact, something like a quarter of the GDP of the United States is affected by that water district could be something that would motivate us to have some kind of interstate agreement here. Now, our Colorado River is all within Texas, but it's a huge GDP generator for Texas. And the bond issue, or whatever it is, coming up in November, that where with use of the rainy day fund, maybe we could get some Corps of Engineer projects to put water underground from overflowing spring Missouri and Mississippi rivers into reservoirs that will not have evaporation. Do you see anything in the future maybe that we can use that economic argument to the benefit of water storage and conservation?
I think actually you are going to see more and more discussion of these sort of grand scale, grand scheme projects, because you have huge populations in areas that are running out of water. I mean, as the snow dwindles in the mountains, the cities that get the water from snow melt will become thirstier and thirstier. So you either will have very large population disruptions, or you'll have very large engineering projects that will try and figure out some way to bring the water to the people. But one of the things that really struck me about the Bush administration was, even though they were very much in denial about whether or not climate change was happening, they did commission a study by the Rand Corporation about if it were actually happening, what would be the national security implications of it? And one of the figures that stuck in my mind is that they calculated there would be a minimum of 150 million climate refugees, people who were no longer able to live in given areas because either the coastal waters had risen too much, the storms had become too violent, the areas had run out of water, the land had become unusable for crops, a whole variety of impacts. But one of the things that they saw as national and international security threats was the displacement of large populations because of a changing climate. And I think we will have to be as creative as we possibly can to deal with these issues in the not-so-distant future.
We have a question here. Would you say your name, please, and stand?
I'm Elaine Goodson. I found out lately that the city is beginning a process of hearings to completely redo the development guidelines, the policies here in the city. And I wonder what kind of proposals you would have in terms of housing that would make an impact on the drought situation here.
Is that the Imagine Austin plan? Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, and I've been trying to remember the name of the gal that's in charge of the city, but I've been in contact with her about another issue, and they're going to start public hearings in a few months and have a lot of input.
I think it might be related to the Imagine Austin plan, but they did hire a planning group to help with the rewrite of the land development code to respond to the Imagine Austin plan, which was a vision for how we would grow as a community. And there'll probably be epic battles there because you have a lot of people with real estate interests who want to continue to sell their land and develop, standard suburban-style subdivisions farther and farther out that will rely on very large amounts of water per household. And then you'll have, others arguing, this is unsustainable. We can't continue to grow like this. But there's not a clear agreement around how much our diminishing water supply will limit how we can grow. And that's where I really think we need leadership, and we need a broad community discussion about this that's not in denial, that's not muddled with, people's desires for large contracts to build, large infrastructure projects, but that is a very clear discussion about the projections around the drought, the real availability of water, and how much and how we can grow. And I don't know if that will be embedded or really included in the discussions around a development of a new land development code. I think it needs to be, and it was certainly something that many of us were arguing for in the whole Imagine Austin plan. I think it's in there in a little way, but... Right, so this is an opportunity for people to really say, how are we going to deal with this? How will we change our development patterns in order to minimize the waste of water and energy? Because they are tied.
We're down to the wire. We've got 1 minute. So can you condense your question?
Hi, my name's Tom Bodine. I have an observation for Dale. I was installing alarm systems in Southern California. I was at a consolidated Edison gas plant, and it was out in the middle of San Ysidro County. It was out in the middle of the desert, and the way they cooled that plant was with a huge heat sink. So they
was
didn't
it
use
a geothermal loop?
No, it was a gas plant. So unfortunately, it wasn't as green as we'd like. But they didn't use any water to cool that plant because it's out in the middle of the desert.
What did they use for the heat sink?
It's a big steel structure, like 3 or 4 stories tall, around the output of it's basically a gas turbine. So it's like a jet engine inside, and the heat from the jet engine would go through this heat sink to cool the air before it went out into the desert. But then it's out in the desert, it's hot already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, okay, so the radiator cooled it. Yeah. Geothermal, I think, is another opportunity for a heat sink. Yeah.
We want to thank you. This was an outstanding presentation, and we've got a lot to think about. I'll use the term think rather than worry, and to plan for. Thank you, Brigid, and Giver. And I want to thank our media team for all their hard work, and for our audiences. Thank you for coming, and we'll see you early in September.